Is the future of silage bagged? That's the question we're going to answer today with my panel of experts, Jake Schmitz, Marc Etchebarne, and Anthony Nunes, coming up in this edition of the Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of the Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field, then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey, welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture show. It's me, your host, Damian Mason. You knew that. I've got three guys on here that are talking about a subject that I think you might hear more about. We're talking about making the livestock feed more efficient. We talk a lot about efficiencies in this business, but we also sometimes forget about the waste. We're very good at producing stuff. We also waste a great deal of what we produce. And we hear this. You've heard me talk about it. 1/3 of all food produced globally goes to waste. What about the feed that we make for our animals? Are we wasting that? Actually, we are. We're talking about silage. So what we're talking about here today is food waste, environmental compliance, reducing emissions, and also making feed more valuable for the livestock. I've got Anthony Nunes. Anthony Nunes is a California transplant. He and his family moved to Iowa to milk cows. I've got Jake Schmitz. He is an environmental guy. He's going to tell you his exact statement, but he's a carbon emissions reduction specialist. And I've also got Marc Etchebarne. Marc Etchebarne is a nutritionist. You know, in the livestock operations today, we have contractual freelance nutritionists, and that's what he is. He helps put together feed rations for large-scale farmers like Mr. Nunes. So anyway, I'm going to go to you first, I think, Jake. What are we even talking about here? Because the idea is how we store the feed, how we capture it, store it, and then ultimately use it. We could be doing a better job, both for the waste reduction and also the emissions reduction. And I want to know, is this something that we're going to see more of or hear more about as environmental concerns mount, or shall I say environmental pressures increase on America's farms?
I sure hope so, because not only does it reduce the greenhouse gases that go into the atmosphere, but it also helps the farmer's bottom line. When you're not wasting feed, you're able to feed it to animals to make milk or meat with. And so, what's going on here is farmers work hard to make their feed for their animals. And if it's not stored properly, it can go to waste by getting out into the weather and get rained on and rot. And as that feed rots, it creates greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide and CO2. But also all that energy that it takes to create that feed, all the tractors that are running, all the people's time, all that, the hours in the day and the hours in the month that's growing out in the field, all that goes to waste whenever that feed ends up rotting instead of going into an animal's belly to make milk or meat.
Yeah, something we actually are thinking more about, and we probably should. Growing up on the dairy farm, we'd have, sometimes you'd let hay sit outside. It's like, well, why did you rented the acre, you produced the alfalfa, you baled it up, and then you stuck it outside in a round bale, and you lost conservatively 1/3 of it. The diesel fuel was spent on that. Damian's time was out there doing that. And so why did you do that? So I think this is a big topic. Anthony, I'm going to go to you before we go to your nutritionist. You're a dairy farmer in Iowa. Just for context, your family of Portuguese descent went to California. I met your father actually at a conference we've just decided before we hit record. Tell us a little bit about your operation, then we're going to go to feed. Your operation is in what part of Iowa?
I'm in Northwest Iowa.
Okay.
So we moved here in 2007. From Tulare, and I'd be the 4th generation dairy farmer.
You milk jerseys.
I do.
That means you're in like the 8th percentile, like 8% of the dairy cows in the United States, Jerseys, the rest are Holsteins pretty much. And a few
Pretty
show
much.
cows that are my favorite, brown Swiss.
Right.
How many cows do you milk?
Milk about 2,000.
So you've got a pretty big feed bill. I rent my farm here in Indiana to a dairy farmer about the same size as you, around 2,000 cows at his main facility. When I think about feed, he goes out here to this alfalfa field behind my house, just took off 3rd cutting, probably going to get 5 cuttings, went out there, mowed it, accumulated it, chopped it, put it in big semi trailers, went down to his farm, dumped it on a big slab of concrete with concrete walls, take a payloader out there, they pack it down and they cover it with plastic. Then they take cut tires and put it on top of it. That's how feed is done. You're telling me that's how feed is done, but not always, because maybe there's a better way. Tell me how you do feed. And I'm talking about the silage portion of the feed ration, which, let's face it, to get the milk out of your cows, you feed the heck out of them. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We're very high forage diets here. A lot of corn silage, mostly. We've been around bagging since we've been storing it in bags since probably early 80s. It wasn't a German bagger, but we've been doing it for quite a while. So we also been on the custom side of putting up feed, not only feeding it, but doing custom work. And so you take something like an alfalfa, there's going to be a lot of shrink to that, especially if you don't put it in a bag.
All right. So I just described how my dairyman does it. He doesn't put his stuff in a bag. You put your stuff in a bag. And to the person that's listening to this, that's never been on dairy, this is the one thing about dairymen, especially 4th generation. They assume that every human listening to this has been on a dairy farm and understands we've been bagging it. You know that to the average person, that means taking something out of a field and putting it in a Ziploc bag and putting it in the refrigerator, right? Would you please expand a little bit more for me, Mark? Because sometimes Anthony is not what you'd call able to explain things in a bigger context. Help me out here. How my guy does it, I just explained it. Tell me how it's done over there at the Nunes farm.
Okay, so essentially when the feed is ready to be harvested, it's just like what you described with the haylage there. It's like a giant lawnmower, and then as it's picked up with the tractors and delivered to the farm, it's put in essentially like a giant bag or a tube, if you will, of feed. It's usually the diameters anywhere between 10 and 12 feet, and they essentially pack it to the point where, it really reduces the amount of oxygen that is able to get to that feed. So like you described with the Ziploc bag, it's immediately preserved. And being in the bagging situation, like you described before, versus the pit, you just don't lose as much product when you're dealing with a smaller surface area. Because of the size of Anthony's operation, obviously we're using a significant amount of feed, but being in that bag situation, we only lose probably 3% versus, where Jake is talking about in California on a conventional California pit, you could see upwards of 8 to even 15% loss. So, that bottom line it's real. When you're losing feed, that's an increased cost to the dairyman.
All right, so we're talking about is the future of silage and feed for animals bagged, because that's really what we're talking about. Is the future of animal feed bagged versus stacked, packed, right? Stacked and packed. My guy stacks it and packs it, and you said maybe they're losing 8 to 15% of just to waste, which is obviously a big environmental toll. But here's the deal, Jake. If that's in California where you are, Mr. Nunes is in Northwest Iowa. I'm in Northeast Indiana. The waste arguably is more here because we get something that they don't have a lot in Tulare County. We get a thing called precipitation, right?
Right. And so, that's another great thing about bags, because since the feed is in a bag, it can rain on it all day long, but it's just the bag is getting wet. The feed inside is still preserved really well. So it's a very great way to preserve feed. You don't need big barns. You can set it out in your farm fields, at the edges of your fields by the road or whatever. And so bags can be real efficient in so many ways. You can put the bag right beside where you harvest it, and have, without having to haul it all the way across the county to take it to that one pit. And so there's so many benefits to making silage in a bag, but the biggest one definitely is the reduction of waste. as we touched on earlier, just all that production for nothing, to just rot, in your barnyard, is just doing nobody any favors at all. And the greenhouse gases coming from that are all three major greenhouse gases in agriculture. They're nitrous oxides, methanes, and carbon dioxide. So it's a big deal to make sure you don't waste it.
Okay, I have a question though before I go to Anthony. So get ready. You're on deck, Mr. Nunes. When you talk about those gases, when you put them in a bag, and by the way, this bag that Marc described, it's like a 10-foot diameter bag. It's packed in there versus you taking this chopped forage, which is chopped corn for the listener that doesn't know much about this. Remember, we always have people that are, maybe they might sell like cranberry processing machinery or something. So they listen to this. The normal way to feed beef and obviously dairy for sure is you chop stuff when it's still pretty green. It goes through a fermentation process when you pack it and stack it and cover the plastic or put it in a bag. And then you feed it with a big payloader or with a skid loader throughout time, put it in your feed mixer. Doesn't it still release this gas when it's in a bag? It produces the gas.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it does release the ensiling things, making silage does create gases, but it's whenever you do the complete measurement, the rotting of that silage is where the big problem is. Because
it's not the fermentation process that the feed goes through this fermentation process. It's not the fermentation process that happens that causes the issue. It is the
waste.
The waste. Okay. Got it.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right. So it's when it starts to rot. Okay. Mr. Nunes, tell me about the journey. You started doing this right when you moved to the Midwest. Is that what I'm hearing? You started you started putting your feed, your animal feed, your silage in bags as soon as you guys moved to Iowa.
Yeah, we pretty much bought a bagger initially when we first came here. One of it was just to make sure that for DNR purposes, we didn't have any runoff. So we were able to control the runoff without having to build a real expensive embankment, because the DNR was wanting control from runoff leachage coming off the silage pile. So we pretty much started doing the bagging, not only because of that, but also because of the shrink issue. So we have, you're running a 2% shrink versus, in 07, the shrink on a pile was, 12 to 15%. Well, it gets pretty expensive when you got to put up, an additional 10% extra feed for just to maintain for the whole year.
Yeah, basically you're saying that it's pretty expensive to produce 10% more than you need just to account for waste.
That's correct. Yeah. So, you have to run machinery. It's just a lot more. And then once we ensile it in a bag, it's able to control, we're able to control those gases. Yes, you're going to have some gases coming off at first, but once it's ensiled, it doesn't continue to re-ensile like it does with a silage pile, where it continues to release gases.
Right. Now, here's the thing. I'm being all honest here. You're in Northwest Iowa. You're not in California. You don't have a bunch of Prius drivers pulling in your driveway and pestering you. Whether it releases gases or not, what do you care? The waste, I can understand. We want to reduce the waste. I understand that because that's your bottom line. As far as the gases, you're not incentivized to reduce gases. Why do you care?
Well, I think as you continue to the way that the process of the bag works is that it keeps it cool. It doesn't keep re-fermenting. So it keeps the silage, the forage quality is much better coming out of that. And, there's not really a reason. I wouldn't say there's environmental reasons, but it's the feed quality issue, because you stop that gases from continuing to just move on, just keep going, right? It never stops.
Because that's the other thing I want to kick over here to Marc. Marc, you're the nutritionist. You're the one that knows about all this. Is it actually make the feed better besides reducing waste? If I stick this in a bag versus sticking it on a concrete and piling it up and stacking it, is the feed better?
Yes. So just like what Anthony was saying,
I knew you would say it better, more articulately. I mean, let's face it. He's a damn dairy farmer, so he's not going to be very articulate, right?
So what happens is, like, once you're pulling the silage off of the face, or the area that you're pulling the feed from, what happens is you get a secondary fermentation And with that, you're introducing air, which is obviously the point of not having fermented feeds, because essentially you want it to be like a pickle. It's preserved. Its lifespan is indefinite. Once that air is introduced, then suddenly it starts to rot and spoil. And with that secondary fermentation, you're getting things like molds and yeasts that are starting to grow. And then when you introduce that to the animal, then you're starting to have problems with rumen upsets. So then you're going to have animals that go off feed, that become sick. There's just a plethora of problems that you're going to deal with when you're dealing with spoilage. The other thing to remember when you're dealing with 2,000 animals like Mr. Nunes is, not all feed's ready at the same time. When you're putting in all your feed into a giant pile, you're going to be chopping, let's say a few hundred acres, and then it may have to stop before you get to the next one. Well, that's introducing time for air to penetrate and start that fermentation, the rotting process, before you're able to get to the next field. At least with the bag, you're able to do whatever work needs to be accomplished in that time span. It can be paused, it can be sealed, there's no loss, and then you can resume activity again when needed.
I got to tell you, I kind of see that as being a big one when my guy is doing this, and I say, if you didn't get enough to fill up, we call them bunkers, or as you said, piles. If you didn't get enough to complete the pile, and you got to wait another 3 days or 5 days, then aren't you losing feed value or kind of stopping the process and restarting it? So I think that might be something real. So go ahead and speak some more to that, Mark, please.
Yep, and then on top of that, you're able, because of the bag is like that Ziploc that you're describing, you're actually able to get into that feed sooner if need be. Like for a standard pile, when you put up a corn silage pit or in the bunker, typical practice is you try to wait at least 30 days. The longer you can wait, the better for that ensiling process to work its stages. But with the bag, because it's devoid of air, I'm able to get into that bag if needed, not desirable, but I can get into it, within a week to 10 days. Mm-hmm. So it gives me more ability to get into feeds, sooner. And also, bagging isn't just for silages. There's times when Mr. Nunes comes across a deal where we can buy, something that's excess. There's a lot of waste feeds on the human side, whether it be sweet corn, peas, soy hulls. There's just so many different things that the ruminant can take on, that we can store it in bags and then feed it at our leisure, instead of having to slam it into the rations for a short period of time, which causes problems too. So
yeah,
a lot of advantages.
Okay, back to the environmental part of it. You're a fan of this, Jake, or you probably are a proponent of this, or you think this is where we're going with this. Kind of walk me down where ultimately you see things heading. Are we going to have to do this because of regulatory reasons? And before you answer that, I want to remind you, while we're talking about environmental stuff, a company that might be able to help you comply with environmental stuff, look to the future, and improve your bottom line is a company called Truterra. Maybe you can put in cover crops. Maybe you already are. If you actually reduce tillage, which is good for the environment, reduces carbon release, and also maybe you can do something like nitrogen reduction on your farm. Cover crops, good for the soil, microbial activity, reduces erosion. Nitrogen reduction, because we're probably overusing nitrogen anyhow, because we're learning more and more about soil biologicals, and also the fact that we used to fling the stuff everywhere. In other words, probably you're doing stuff, or could be doing stuff, that's good for your ground, good for your soil, and good for your bottom line, and you could be getting paid for it. That's where Truterra comes in. Truterra, truterraag.com. Go to truterraag.com. They can help you transition to a more regenerative agriculture and also make money doing so. It's all about a new secondary revenue source for your farm, truterraag.com. Okay, from an environmental standpoint, is this going to be something we have to do?
It's going to be something everybody wants to do, because like you just said, like with Truterra, the things that reduce greenhouse gases also are really good for the bottom line. When I go onto farms and help people reduce their greenhouse gases, it's helping their herd health, it's helping their production, it's helping with labor costs, it's helping with all these things, fuel reductions. And so the things that actually are good for reducing greenhouse gases are good for the farmer's bottom line. So I don't look at it as something that's going to be forced on us. I don't know. Who knows? We don't know how people are going to vote once they get up to Washington, D.C. You know, we vote down here and put us into Washington, D.C. And they may not even vote the way we intend for them to vote when they get there. But the thing I do know is that, you know, using, like you just mentioned, reducing your nitrogen fertilizer is going to create less nitrous oxide in the atmosphere, and nitrous oxide is way worse than CO2 in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so, and you know, like if you can smell the from your silage pile, like the nutrients going into the atmosphere, those are nutrients that are not in the feed now that's going to produce milk and stuff. So it's just like being conservative and cutting down on your greenhouse gas emissions is a way to be more profitable in agriculture without question. So yeah.
Do you have dairy farmers that are your clients and they say, come out here and help me with this, and you help them become more environmentally sustainable or reduce their emissions? Is that what
That's exactly what I do. That's my job. Yes. That's all
right. So tell me, go to Anthony Nunes' place and tell me why he's going to justify doing this, because I'm going with the one. He gets more quality feed, but he also is doing more expense. Those bags cost more every year to use them because they're disposable than the concrete. So tell me, walk through the environmental part, and I want to go to Mr. Nunes and talk about the economics.
Well, so they're one and the same, actually. So basically, the environmental side, if he's wasting 15%, like we mentioned earlier, you can waste 15% of your feed through rotting feed on the side. That's just you know, I don't know how much you're paying over there in Iowa for your feed, but say it's $300 a ton. Think about the savings there. Whenever 15% of $300 is what, $45 that you're throwing out the window just to let rot on the side of the road. So it's an economic thing, but also that rot is creating the greenhouse gases. And so any amount of greenhouse gases that we can reduce on your farm, there's potential that we can take advantage of that through carbon credits and things like that. Everything that we do, anything that has to, that you do take advantage of to get carbon credit money for, has to be completely verified and certified. You have to go through a lot of rigor. And right now we're trying to prove that right now with bagging equipment and rotting feed. So I can't go and sign him up for a project to do this today. However, it is something I'm working on trying to figure out, because I do recognize that it is going to be a big greenhouse gas savings. I just can't prove it. I don't have enough science research that's been done in the universities yet to prove how much greenhouse gases are coming off that feed. But as soon as that happens, then we will be able to go in there and offer farmers money to help buy the equipment to make this silage, if we can prove that it reduces from putting it in a pit the greenhouse gases.
Hey, Mr. Nunes, I know you're looking at your phone right now. If you're watching my TV show, you can see that. Most of you listen to the audio, but by the way, if you ever will watch the show, this Business of Agriculture show streams. A new episode releases every Monday on Acres TV. That's Acres TV, the digital platform for agricultural media that the Hefty brothers invented. It's also on my YouTube channel, the Damian Mason channel. Go to YouTube and just type in Damian Mason, hit subscribe. It's completely free. Anyway, then you can watch as well as here. You can also watch a bunch of my other commentary videos that I put out. And if you were watching, you'd see that Mr. Nunes, well, he got a little bit bored, so he started looking at his phone. But now I'm coming to him and asking him a question. All right. First off, Jake over here.
I wasn't bored. I was actually doing a little research.
You're doing a little what?
I'm doing a little research.
Okay. I want to ask you a question. This ties into that True Terra thing. There might be a program, it's not there yet, where you can actually get incentivized to bag your silage versus stacking and packing it. And you're already doing it. So you'd say, of course, I'll take the incentive, but you haven't gotten any experience with that so far, right?
Right. So here in the Midwest, we haven't had too much like California would. We haven't seen a lot of those environmental regulations come down towards us, like air quality and things like that. But we do have what we call the farm. It's FARM. And we have an environmental side, so it's pretty much coincides with the ESG, it coincides with the ESG that we're pretty much getting forced to do this stuff. So one advantage is we're already doing it, so that's great. But already on the dairy, we're probably the most sustainable people. We're the most sustainable agriculture there probably is out of any other ones.
What about the waste? And this is going to be the question. I'm playing this up here. All right, so we reduce food waste. We got a boatload of plastic waste. All these bags are 10 foot wide times what? A couple 100 feet long, and they just lay on the ground. And then you go out there and you keep, forking into them with your skid loaders or whatnot to put in the feed mixer. All that plastic ends up somewhere. You could make the environmental argument against bags on that basis. Yes.
You probably could, but I don't think that outweighs what the benefits would be of it. I mean, just the feed savings alone and the fuel and all that, it should offset.
Yeah. So if you're cutting back waste by 10%, and then with every pound of waste is also a certain amount of diesel and a certain amount of trips across the field, compaction, et cetera. So I'm kind of seeing that. Do you recycle your plastic bags?
We do not.
Okay. Is that day coming, Jake?
We hope so. It's been lots of efforts in the past to recycle ag plastic, but they've had a hard time getting it in a quality that can make products. I mean, they've tried 2x4s and park benches and stuff like that, but it's the amount of soil and stuff that gets hooked onto those bags and feed that sticks to it and clings to it. It's hard to get cleaned off. And so in order for us to take advantage of some of these plastic recycling programs on farms, we have to try to get our plastic cleaner. And so that requires, make sure that you get it as clean as you can before you put it in a dumpster. When you stack them on the ground and stuff like that, it's just going to accumulate too much dirt on it to be able to use it later.
Yeah, it's a difficult plastic to recycle. It's like recycling plastic bags from Walmart or your trash bags. I mean, it's kind of what you're saying. It's a difficult. Milk jugs are easier to recycle than these bags, let's say.
That's right, but it can be done. It'll just take some effort and some education on how to go about make sure your plastic's clean enough and stuff like that.
So I want to talk about the dairy, and then I'll go to Mark on some other feed quality issues. Okay, if you're selling me on the idea that if I'm a dairyman, I'm going to do this. The only thing is, there's only 35,000 dairy operations in the United States, maybe 40,000 in the whole country. 27,000 dairy operations. If we switch all of them, we have made a big dent because there's still a lot of feed. But then all those dairymen are going to scream, you know what, Anthony, this is cool for you, but you increased my labor. Is it more labor intensive to do this than stacking and packing?
No. So for instance, like where we're at, when it gets minus 20, it's not real fun. And you get 12 inches of snow and you're sitting up there trying to pull frozen tires and plastic off a pile. And then on top of that, you need to clean the rot off. Most people aren't going to do that. You're not going to have employees that are going to be going, oh, geez, it's minus 20 and the wind's blowing 30 mile an hour. We're going to do a good job here today cleaning this off. So what we have is generally that it doesn't freeze in the bag. You might get some freezing around, but in our bag, it doesn't take any more time.
Okay. So the way you feed it is you've got a guy out there, he takes the payload or skid load or whatever it is, you cut the bag, you start scooping it up, and then you pick up the plastic as you go and through the bag, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There is an art form to it. There's a certain way to do it. There's a certain way to move it. So we don't have plastic, in the feed. That's unacceptable. That's not something that we want, because then we get into the lagoon and then we have to pump our manure, and then it's just a big problem. So, if you do the bag right properly and pull it out properly, you really don't have any little pieces. It's pretty clean, even on our dirt. So we do have concrete and we do have dirt. So we generally
you put the bags on concrete in some places, you put the bags on dirt some places.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll put it on either one. So we use poor man's concrete all winter, and then when it comes to springtime, then we'll use the concrete area. Because
in the wintertime, the dirt's frozen, and then when the freeze goes out, you want to not be slopping around. I got it. Let's put a pencil to this for me, Mark. You're the guy that has to put these rations together. You've got dairymen like Mr. Nunes that comes to you, and they say, all right, make it make sense. All right, I'm fine with the environmental stuff, but make it make sense for my bottom line, because these are businesses after all.
Well, that's pretty easy, just going back to the shrink, because, just how silage is priced in the Midwest, it just goes off the corn board. So whatever the multiplier is,
Hey, you're doing that thing like I talked about with Mr. Nunes, you assume that everyone that's listening to this knows what the corn board is, and they do not. So let's be a little more rudimentary. As I always point out, there's some person that's in the business of agriculture, and you know what they do? They like run a cotton gin. They have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. Any given day, you can see what the corn price is trading in Chicago. They take that price and then they multiply that by, what that cornfield would typically yield if it was just going straight to grain corn instead of silage. So when you take that price and you see how much the animals are going to eat, because that's a given, the numbers start getting really staggering. Like Mr. Nunes said, when you have to buy 10% more just to make it the entire year, well, suddenly the economics make clear sense that shrink is a true number. Like it cannot be ignored.
Okay, so you can pencil it out to a client like Anthony just on the shrink, the waste.
Correct.
Okay.
It helps that he owns a bagger already. So when you own a bagger, you're going to bag feed. But the only caveat with that is you have to have the real estate to store it too. Because, when you have a bunker or a pile, you can go higher. When you have a bag, you have to go longer. So as long as you have the real estate to put in the proper amount of feed, it makes economic sense.
That is an argument, by the way, Anthony. I go down to the dairy farm, the guy that rents my property, and he has a few acres, I don't know, maybe 10, 5 tied up with these bunkers. And it's also stacked up 30, 40 feet. And it's pretty massive. You're getting 10-foot bags. And also you don't even get the issue of compaction. It's probably not as tight as the stuff that's been driven over with a bulldozer.
Oh, it's probably not as, density wise, I don't know how you would say that, but I do know in the bag, it's a little bit different. It's pretty tight coming out of the bag, but it's probably not, if somebody's doing a real good job on a pile, yes, but there's a lot of guys that do jobs on piles that are not very good either.
Yeah. What about then the real estate? Is that an issue? Because like you said, if you're using it when it's dry, I guess it's okay. If you're using it when it's frozen, it's okay. So you just go to an area and stick it out on the dirt.
That's correct. Yeah. So we run 14 by 500 bags is what we run. We
14 feet in diameter, 500 feet long.
Yep. And so we'll put in 14 by 500s. We put in about 12 to 1,200 to 1,250 ton of corn silage in a bag.
Got it. All right. Go back to your point, Jake. You say it's not going to be required. We look at things like the Inflation Reduction Act. We look at these things where we're going to have all kinds of new environmental compliance, and a certain amount of our grain or a certain amount of our energy has to be from renewable sources, et cetera. You don't see anything coming down the pike where we're going to have to do this?
Well, you got to remember, I'm a geologist and a climatologist and not a politician. So I try not to get into politics just because it's just so ugly in America. So I'm not having any pressure put on me to make people do this. I just know that whenever I offer these opportunities to farmers, farmers are pretty excited to engage and participate, because it's not about forcing them to do something. It's about, hey, I get to do this, be great for the environment, and help my bottom line on my farm. Yeah. So to me, it's just not worth even going into the politics about it.
All right. Answer me this, Marc Etchebarne, 27,000 dairies. I was wrong. I said 35,000. So 27,000 dairies. That's one place that we do a lot of silage, and where this makes sense. We also feed a lot of silage in the nation's feed yards. Help me out here. 9 million milking cows in the United States. There's about how many cattle on feed in the United States? More than that. Significantly.
Yeah. No, so if you're going, well, it's hard to compare with the feedlot guys. They don't actually feed a lot of silage because, it's more of a starch-driven phenomenon when you're finishing cattle. But definitely when you're looking at the dairy farms and the direction, obviously the bagging is going to be bigger in the Midwest where you have smaller farms. At the end of the day, the bagging is most efficient for, smaller sized to medium sized dairy farms, just because, the point of it is to reduce the amount of waste and try to get through the face as quickly as possible. So you just don't want to put up a large bunker of feed if you're only feeding a few hundred animals, just be, you can't get across it in a timely manner and you would lose so much, and it wouldn't be beneficial. But back to your question in general, I think everything's just driven with moderation, right? I mean, if the pendulum ever swings too far in any direction, it's not good. I think the bagging definitely serves its purpose, and I think the bunkers also serve the purpose. But I think that mitigating both sides of the things and, being stewards of the land, like what Mr. Nunes was talking about, the environmental implications. We don't want wastewater. I don't want sick cows. Like, I don't want spoiled feed. I mean, everything, it's all summation. Yep. Everything is a cost. So if we can reduce our costs, that's a good thing. And we're not talking about reducing costs by sacrificing quality or sacrificing, what we're trying to do with the animal. If anything, if we're able to get one more lactation out of that animal, that's even better, because we're giving it that much better feed and we're becoming that much more profitable, and we're making that much more food, because there's never going to be a shortage.
You talked about the right size. So this is mostly for dairies, because the beef feed yards are in a different feed stuff thing. So it's going to be this, if this is applicable at all, it's going to be mostly on the nation's 27,000 dairies. You said not all of them. Fair Oaks Farms is about 90 miles west of me. Mm-hmm. I think they get 35,000 cows. Do bags work for them, or do they work for 2,000 cow operations like my guy and Anthony? Anthony, you can answer that question after I hear it from Mark. Mark?
It would depend on the feedstuffs that they're putting in, what the time limitations there are. It's always weather dependent. It's like making hay. Everybody wants to make hay until the rain comes. So then suddenly, situations arise where bagging would be far superior than putting up a pit. Or for instance, if you're running short on feed and you have to get feed into the cows in a timely manner, then you might want to put up a few bags, because that's going to ensile and be readily available in a sooner time. So realistically, a very large scale operation, probably a pit or a bunker situation is more suited to what they're doing. But and a farm like Anthony's, where you're 2,000 some animals, and you need to present these animals with clean feed in a very timely manner with reduced costs, then bagging is definitely.
Anthony, how many? Okay, you've been doing this since 2008. You said that. How many bags per? 2000 what?
We've been doing it since the 80s.
Oh, since the 80s. Okay, you moved when you moved to Iowa. You kept the process going. How many bags? How many 14 feet by 500 feet long bags at your dairy farm will there be? Say, come October, November.
So we mostly put up corn. We put up corn silage mostly. So we'll put up about anywhere between 16 to 20 bags, depending on the year.
And you don't do alfalfa haylage?
No, we don't do any alfalfa here. We're in the middle of corn and beans.
I've been there. That's called Iowa. All right. So get me out of this episode. The point is, and I guess we'll go to Anthony on this one also. Do you think that more dairy farms should be doing this, because it just makes sense for a lot of the reasons we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, in certain situations, it works really well. So if you're going to be doing alfalfa, it makes really good sense, because you're going to be able to store the feed and keep it good. If you're going to do earlage, that's going to work good too. If you're putting up a lot of, say, rye hay, rye forage, well, that might be a case that it might work better than the pile there, because it'll stay longer. It'll stay good longer.
Yeah. So you just went through corn, you went through haylage, you went through earlage. For the person that's never been on a dairy farm, what's earlage?
Earlage is just the ears. So you take a combine head and you run it through the chopper.
And it's green. And it's great. And it's green, of course. Yes. And then chopping rye for it. Okay. All right. We're asking the question and we answered it. Is the future of silage bagged, and should it be? Is it better than stacked and packed? You heard from Jake Schmitz over here from the environmental standpoint. You heard from Marc Etchebarne from the nutrition standpoint. You heard from Anthony Nunes from the dairy farm perspective. I think it's a pretty convincing argument, and I think we're going to probably see more of it. So that's the last question. Are we going to see more of this moving forward? Jake, are we going to see more of this? When I drive through the countryside and I see a dairy farm out there, is this going to be like, man, remember when we used to put it in bunkers?
Yeah, I think you will see more of it. It's people who do it like it. You see neighbors starting to do it, and once you have a machine, you start custom doing it for your other neighbors and stuff like that. Sounds like Anthony did the same thing, and so yeah, I think you're going to see more and more of it across the countryside. And it'll be better quality, better for the cows, and it's better for milk production.
Yeah.
The more milk you get per cow, the better it is for the environment too. So,
and to answer your question, we also might end up getting some environmental incentive payments to do so. Mark, are you going to look back and say, 10 years ago, I didn't have hardly any of my clients that did this. Now all my clients do bags. Is that what you're going to say 10 years from now?
I always push for bagging. I always ask for bags just because you can be so much more selective in the types of feeds that you can grow, because a fresh cow doesn't have the same nutrient requirements as an animal that's about ready to go dry. So I can feed as little or as much feed as I want, and bagging really helps, facilitate those scenarios. So
the big benefit, we even talked about this previously, was that you can have different bags for different rations. You can have, because it's a smaller thing than a bunker. So now I've got a bag that's really good for freshening first calf heifers. I got another bag that's really good for cows that are late in their lactation, et cetera.
Correct.
It only took you 40 minutes on this recording to get to that point, Mark. Congratulations.
That's it.
All right. And then lastly, are you going to look, Anthony, someday and say, you know what? Kind of excited about this because we were trendsetters. We were doing this in the 1980s. Other people should have joined in, and now they are. We're going to see you're going to go to the dairy conferences, and people are going to say, man, I should have been doing this sooner.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a place for it, right? And if Jake's right, and going through the ESG and this environmental stuff, if you're milking a 10,000 cow dairy, it may not be the right place fit for it on the corn silage, but on a smaller dairy, and if you get advantages on the environmental side, that's definitely a good thing moving forward.
I think it's funny that you just called a smaller dairy, meaning like a 2,000 cow dairy, a smaller dairy. We milked 60 cows growing up. So just to put it in perspective. All right. My name is Damian Mason, and you knew that. Marc Etchebarne, nutritionist, Jake Schmitz, environmental guy, Anthony Nunes, Iowa dairy farmer. And this is the business of agriculture. Well, that concludes another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. This episode was brought to you by Pattern Ag. Everybody in agriculture understands the importance of soil health. We also keep an eye on our soil better than we ever did through advanced soil testing. But what if there was a company that provided predictive analytics, not just checking out nutrients and all the elements that are in there, but also could tell you the degree of risk you face with disease and pest pressure? That's right, Pattern Ag can do that. They actually can tell you, hey, you're going to have a real issue here. You can proactively treat for corn rootworm or cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome before the problem actually starts costing you yield. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to find the nearest rep that can help you start doing better for your soil.